Most people think the difference between failure and success is talent or luck. It's not. It's the tiny decisions you make when no one is watching. The truth: 98% of people fail because they wait, and the 2% win because they act. If you feel stuck, it's not because you're incapable. It's because you're hesitating. And today, I'm going to show you exactly why the world rewards the doers, not the dreamers. Most people don't fail because they lack talent. They fail because they underestimate the timeline required for meaningful success. They assume results should appear in weeks, not years, and when progress feels slow, they label themselves as incapable instead of inexperienced. The truth is that success is a delayed harvest. Your effort compounds long before it becomes visible. But the 98% want visible proof before they continue. So they quit at the exact moment when things were finally starting to work. They confuse discomfort with failure, and they confuse slow growth with no growth. They stop doing the work because they cannot see the reward yet. They let impatience disguise itself as logic and convince them that the path isn't worth pursuing. And in that moment, their potential dies quietly, long before it had the chance to mature. And the 2% who succeed operate on a completely different emotional timeline. They don't attach their self-worth to short-term results because they understand that mastery requires seasons of invisibility. They are willing to work when nobody applauds, to persist when nobody notices, and to keep going when nothing around them provides evidence that their effort is paying off. They know that consistency is the bridge between where they are and where they want to be, and they are willing to cross that bridge even when the journey feels endless. The 2% don't wait for motivation. They rely on discipline that survives boredom, doubt, and setbacks. They don't collapse when results lag behind effort because they expect the world to test their commitment. They understand that success belongs to those who outlast the dip. And failure for the 98% rarely happens in one dramatic moment. It happens in micro decisions that compound over time. They skip a day, then a week, then a month, thinking they will restart when life feels easier. They underestimate how momentum works and how quickly the mind adapts to lower standards. Every time they retreat from effort, they strengthen the part of themselves that chooses comfort over progress. They rationalize quitting by blaming circumstances, timing, people, or luck, not realizing that the real issue is the habit of surrender. They see obstacles as proof that they are not meant to succeed rather than proof that they are being forged for success. They misinterpret resistance as a sign to stop instead of a sign to push harder. And because of these repeated small choices, failure becomes inevitable, not accidental. And the 2% view the same obstacles through a completely different lens. To them, resistance is not a warning, but a filter, a test that separates the committed from the curious. They don't expect the path to be easy, predictable, or fair because they know growth requires friction. They push through boredom because they know boredom is a sign they are getting closer to mastery, not further away. They push through frustration because they know frustration is simply the brain learning in real time. They push through doubt because they understand that doubt is a temporary emotion, not a permanent limitation. Every time they stay in the game despite the discomfort, they reinforce the identity of someone who finishes what they start. Over time, this identity becomes the engine that carries them forward when results still haven't shown up. And eventually, that persistence compounds into breakthroughs the 98% never experience. And the hardest truth about success is that most people quit right before the transformation would have unfolded. They underestimate how close they were to the tipping point because the tipping point always looks like failure in the moment. It feels heavy, discouraging, and endless, which is why the majority retreat just before the reward arrives. The 2% don't retreat, they lean in, trusting the process even when the process feels punishing. They stay committed long enough for the compounding effect of effort to activate, long enough for skill to catch up with ambition, and long enough for clarity to replace confusion. They don't need the world to validate their progress because they validate it through their persistence. They outlast the storms that scare others away. And in the end, not because they were the smartest or the fastest, but because they simply stayed, success becomes the inevitable outcome of their endurance. Most people fail not because they lack the ability to succeed, but because they are addicted to comfort in ways they don't even recognize. They choose the easier conversation, the easier task, the easier habit until their entire life becomes built around avoiding discomfort. What they don't realize is that comfort feels good in the moment, but quietly destroys their capacity over time. It softens their discipline, weakens their resilience, and convinces them that effort is something to escape instead of something to embrace. The 98% prefer predictable routines that protect their ego rather than challenges that expose their weaknesses. They choose the path that requires less from them today without noticing the long-term cost. And every small decision that avoids discomfort becomes another brick in the wall that separates them from their potential. And the 2% who succeed operate with a completely different philosophy. They chase capacity, not comfort. They intentionally gravitate toward the things that stretch them because they understand that growth only happens when the current version of you is challenged. They don't look for the easiest path. They look for the path that builds skill, discipline, and emotional durability. They are willing to be humbled because humility is the price of mastery. They embrace the moments when they feel incompetent because those moments mean they are expanding beyond their previous limits. Where others see difficulty as a threat, the 2% see it as training. They want to become people who can handle more, endure more, and produce more. And they know that capacity is not inherited. It is built through deliberate struggle. And the 98% avoid friction because they misinterpret discomfort as danger. They think that if something feels hard, it must be wrong, or if they feel fear, it must be a sign to stop. This belief system keeps them trapped in a tiny circle of familiarity where nothing great can ever happen. Every time they step outside that circle, they feel exposed, uncertain, and vulnerable, so they retreat to what feels safe. They never give themselves the chance to develop the emotional muscles required for success because they keep choosing the path that keeps those muscles weak. They want the results of growth without the friction of growth, and that contradiction guarantees disappointment. They don't fail because the goal is impossible. They fail because they never allow themselves to become the person capable of achieving it. And the 2% understand that discomfort is not a threat, it is feedback. It's the body saying, you're entering new territory, and the mind saying, you're building new capacity. They don't run from that feeling, they use it. When something scares them, they lean toward it because they know fear often marks the edges of their potential. When a task feels overwhelming, they break it down and take action anyway because action shrinks fear. They don't expect confidence to come before they start. They know confidence is earned by confronting the thing they were trying to avoid. Every time they choose discomfort on purpose, they become stronger, more capable, and more resilient than they were the day before. Over time, discomfort becomes familiar, and familiar becomes easy, and what once terrified them becomes part of their baseline capacity. And the 98% often sabotage themselves by seeking immediate relief rather than long-term gain. They choose the short-term comfort of scrolling over the long-term reward of skill building. They choose the comfort of emotional avoidance instead of the growth that comes from hard conversations. They choose the ease of procrastination instead of the discipline of starting. These choices feel harmless in the moment, but they compound into a life built around avoiding the essential friction that creates success. This is why they stay stuck, not because they don't know what to do, but because doing it requires choosing discomfort, and they've trained themselves to reject anything that feels inconvenient. The tragedy is that they are capable, but capability without discomfort becomes wasted potential. And the 2% succeed because they make decisions based on who they want to become, not what feels good right now. They are willing to take the harder route today so they can take the easier route tomorrow. They seek out environments that force them to grow, people who challenge their excuses, and routines that require discipline. They deliberately expose themselves to situations that test their emotional limits because they know that capacity built under stress is the most durable form of strength. They don't glorify struggle, but they respect it as the necessary cost of transformation. And they don't fear their weaknesses being exposed because exposure is the first step toward improvement. And comfort becomes a trap because it tricks people into believing that life should be effortless. When something requires sustained effort, the 98% assume they are on the wrong path instead of recognizing that difficulty is a natural part of progress. They crave the illusion of ease so much that they surrender opportunities that would have changed their lives. They tell themselves they'll start when they feel ready, when they feel motivated, or when they feel confident, but those feelings rarely come. Comfort trains them to delay, and delay trains them to fail. Over time, they become experts at avoiding the very discomfort required to unlock their potential, and they never realize how much they gave up just to stay temporarily comfortable. And the 2% take a completely different approach to effort. They don't wait to feel ready. They begin. They don't wait for motivation. They create momentum. They don't wait for conditions to be perfect. They use what they have and refine along the way. They understand that capability is built in the moments when they feel the least confident, not the most. They willingly step into situations where failure is possible because those situations force them to develop new levels of competence. They measure progress not by how easy something feels, but by how willing they are to keep showing up when it feels difficult. And this simple mindset shift, choosing capacity over comfort, becomes their competitive advantage. And what separates the 2% from the 98% is not intelligence, luck, or opportunity. It is their relationship with discomfort. One group avoids it until their potential shrinks into something manageable. The other group moves toward it until their capacity expands into something extraordinary. One group seeks the feeling of ease. The other seeks the feeling of growth. One group hides from the difficult parts of the journey. The other uses the difficult parts as stepping stones. And every time they choose to stretch beyond what is comfortable, the 2% widen the gap between who they were and who they are becoming. Most people stay stuck not because they lack the intelligence to move forward, but because they spend their lives waiting for signs that never come. They wait for permission, for validation, for someone to tell them they're allowed to begin. They want certainty before they take action, as if certainty is something gifted instead of something created. The 98% spend years rehearsing the perfect moment in their mind, while the 2% take imperfect action in real life. They let fear disguise itself as preparation and convince themselves that waiting is responsible, even though waiting is what is slowly destroying their momentum. They don't realize that clarity comes from movement, not stillness. So they stay in place, hoping for confidence to magically appear. And in that paralysis, they lose the opportunities that would have changed everything. And the 2% who succeed operate with a completely different understanding of how progress works. They don't expect to feel ready before they begin because they know readiness is a myth that keeps people frozen in place. They make decisions faster, act earlier, and learn through doing, not theorizing. They understand that taking action when you feel uncertain is not a flaw, it's a strategy. Every step they take, even a small one, generates information that helps them refine their direction. While the 98% hesitate, the 2% experiment, adjust, and build momentum. They trust themselves to learn along the way instead of waiting to feel qualified beforehand. And because they move first, they often arrive first, even if they started with less knowledge or fewer resources. And the 98% cling to the illusion that they need approval from others before they can pursue their goals. They want their friends to confirm the idea is smart, their family to reassure them it's safe, and the world to promise them success before they invest effort. They don't realize that seeking permission is just a socially acceptable form of procrastination. They outsource their power by letting other people decide whether their dreams are realistic. They get trapped in a loop of overthinking and over-explaining, hoping that someone will finally give them the green light. But nobody can grant them the certainty they're searching for. And the longer they wait for approval, the more they reinforce the belief that they cannot trust themselves. And the 2% break this cycle by acting without external validation. They understand that nobody cares about their dreams as much as they do, and nobody is obligated to understand their vision. They make decisions based on their internal compass, not public opinion. When they feel uncertain, they rely on action to create clarity, not conversations to calm their nerves. They don't wait for someone to approve their ambition, because they know ambition doesn't require a permission slip. Every bold move they make strengthens the identity of someone who can rely on themselves. And that self-trust becomes the fuel that powers their progress through the inevitable moments of doubt. And the 98% often believe they are stuck because they lack information, but in reality, they are stuck because they lack action. They consume endlessly videos, books, advice, motivational content, but they rarely put any of it into practice. They don't see that consumption without execution becomes intellectual entertainment, not growth. They think learning more will eventually make them confident enough to begin. But confidence comes from experience, not theory. So they repeat the same cycle, gather information, second, guess themselves, wait for courage, then start over from the beginning. They stay trapped in preparation mode, mistaking movement in their mind for movement in their life. And the 2% use information differently. They don't try to know everything before they start. They try to know enough to take the next step. They understand that real competence is built by doing, failing, adjusting, and doing again. They treat action as a feedback loop rather than a final performance. When something doesn't work, they don't interpret it as a personal flaw. They interpret it as data. This allows them to move quickly, learn fast, and improve continuously. Their progress comes not from having perfect information, but from having the courage to use the information imperfectly and refine as they go. And the 98% are controlled by the fear of making the wrong move, and that fear keeps them from making any move at all. They want guarantees before they commit, which means they never commit. They imagine worst case scenarios so vividly that they paralyze themselves before they even begin. They forget that inaction is also a decision, one that has consequences far more damaging than a mistake. When they look back, it's not the failures they regret. It's the years they spent waiting for life to give them permission to start living. They lose opportunities not because they weren't capable, but because they never let themselves try. And the 2% understand that action carries risk, but inaction carries a greater one. They accept that mistakes are part of the process, and that progress requires movement, not perfection. They don't fear choosing the wrong path because they trust their ability to correct course. They know that you can only steer a moving ship, and that clarity develops through engagement, not hesitation. They take responsibility for their decisions instead of outsourcing them to circumstances or other people. And because they move boldly, they experience more, learn more, and grow faster than those who remain motionless. And many people believe they must wait for motivation before taking action. But the 2% no motivation is created by action, not the other way around. They start before they feel inspired, and inspiration catches up. They take the smallest actionable step available, not because the step is impressive, but because the step is the doorway to momentum. Once they begin, their brain shifts from doubt to focus. Movement silences the noise, and every small win fuels the next step, turning discipline into routine and routine into progress. This is how the 2% turn ordinary effort into extraordinary outcomes. They refuse to let the absence of motivation become the absence of action. And the world rewards those who move, not those who wait. The 2% succeed because they understand that action is the root of confidence, clarity, opportunity, and growth. They don't wait to be chosen. They choose themselves through consistent movement. They don't wait for ideal conditions. They create results with whatever resources they currently have. They don't wait for someone to guide them. They guide themselves through execution. And in a world where the majority hesitate, the minority who act become unstoppable. Most people spend their lives consuming information without ever converting it into action, and they don't realize how deeply this habit undermines their potential. They read books, listen to podcasts, watch motivational videos, and scroll through advice thinking that absorbing knowledge is the same as building a skill. But consumption creates the illusion of progress without the reality of progress. It makes you feel productive while your life remains exactly the same. The 98% stay trapped in this cycle because consumption is easy, comfortable, and risk-free. It doesn't expose them to failure, judgment, or discomfort. It gives them the emotional reward of learning without the accountability of doing. And every day they rely on consumption instead of execution. They reinforce the habit of standing still. And the 2% who succeed understand the difference between intellectual stimulation and practical transformation. They don't consume information for entertainment, they consume it for implementation. When they learn something new, they put it into practice immediately, even if imperfectly. They know that 1 hour of action produces more growth than 10 hours of passive learning. Execution is their default mode, not a special occasion. They don't care about looking knowledgeable, they care about producing results. And because they act on what they learn, their skills compound at a rate that separates them from everyone else. It's not that they know more, it's that they use more of what they know. And the 98% often overthink instead of execute, convincing themselves that they need more information, more clarity, or more certainty before they begin. They get stuck analyzing the details of the plan instead of following the plan. Overthinking feels responsible, but it's really a form of fear wearing a logical mask. The more they think, the more they doubt, the more they doubt, the more they delay. They underestimate how quickly time passes while they sit waiting for perfect conditions. By the time they feel ready, the opportunity they were meant to pursue has already moved on. Execution would have given them the clarity they were searching for, but they choose analysis instead of action, and analysis becomes the cage they cannot escape. And the 2% operate with the opposite mindset. They act first and refine later. They know that clarity is earned, not requested. When they start something, they allow the process to teach them, shape them, and reveal what they could never have understood from the outside. They use action as a diagnostic tool, not just a means to an outcome. Every step teaches them what works and what doesn't, allowing them to adjust in real time. They don't need perfect strategies, they need consistent movement. They trust that momentum will reveal the next step, and it always does. Execution becomes their compass, pointing them toward opportunities that analysis alone could never uncover. And most people confuse activity with achievement, filling their days with tasks that feel productive but have no real impact. They create to-do lists full of low-value work because low-value work feels safe. It doesn't challenge them, stretch them, or demand responsibility. But the 2% focus on high-impact actions, the difficult, uncomfortable tasks that actually move their life forward. They prioritize the conversations they're afraid to have, the projects they're hesitant to start, and the decisions they've been avoiding. They build their results by repeatedly choosing the actions most people run from. And because they execute on the highest value work consistently, their progress accelerates while others stagnate. And the 98% often sabotage their growth by hiding behind preparation. They tell themselves they'll act once they've perfected the plan, once they've gathered more knowledge, or once circumstances are ideal. But perfectionism is just procrastination dressed in ambition. The obsession with getting it right blocks them from getting it done. They forget that no one becomes skilled by thinking about a skill. They become skilled by practicing it. Preparation alone cannot transform a life, only execution can do that. And the gap between where they are and where they want to be grows wider every time they choose preparation over practice. And the 2% see execution as a muscle that must be trained daily. They don't wait for motivation, inspiration, or confidence. They act regardless of how they feel. They know that feelings are unreliable, but discipline is dependable. They treat execution as a non-negotiable part of their identity. They tell themselves the truth that action is the only path to mastery, momentum, and meaningful success. They're not afraid to start small or start messy because they know that greatness is built from imperfect beginnings. Their willingness to execute day after day separates them from the crowd more powerfully than natural talent ever could. And the 98% underestimate how quickly life rewards execution. They assume results require massive leaps when in reality, consistent small actions accumulate into breakthroughs. They get discouraged when they don't see instant results and interpret the lack of immediate progress as a sign that their efforts are pointless. But the real problem isn't the effort, it's the lack of consistency. They stop too soon, quit too early, and abandon their progress right before it compounds. They fail not because their goals were too big, but because their level of execution was too small and too inconsistent to match those goals. And the 2% embrace consistency as their secret weapon. They understand that progress may be invisible for a long time before it becomes undeniable. They trust the compounding effect of repeated effort, even when the results are delayed. They don't measure success by what they see today. They measure it by the momentum they build through daily execution. Every action strengthens their identity, sharpens their skills, and builds the foundation for bigger opportunities. They stay committed long enough for the invisible effort to become visible breakthroughs. And when the results finally show, people call them lucky without realizing how much execution created that luck. And the truth is simple. The world doesn't reward the people who know the most. It rewards the people who do the most with what they know. Execution is the line that separates the dreamers from the achievers, the planners from the performers, the talkers from the transformers. The 98% continue searching for success, while the 2% create it through action. No matter how much knowledge you have, it's useless without implementation. No matter how many ideas you generate, they mean nothing without execution. The people who change their lives are the ones who consistently take action, even when they're scared, unsure, or unprepared. And then the ending truth is this: execution is not just a habit, it is an identity. Once you decide to become a person who takes action, everything in your life begins to shift. Opportunities appear. Skills grow. Confidence rises. Your future expands. Success becomes inevitable not because of who you are today, but because of who you choose to become through the actions you take. The gap between failure and success is not talent, luck, or timing. It is execution. And the moment you choose execution over excuses, you step into the 2%, the group that doesn't just dream of a different life, but builds it with their own hands.